that's harder to do now I'm backed by a big company, because her view is, well, doesn't VMware just have racks and racks and racks of servers that they can just give you to use all the time and play around with? And I'm like, it doesn't quite work that way, honey. You know, it's not like that. It's not like there's just racks. There's a whole data center that Mike can just have for his own use. It's not quite run that particular way. Run a bit more efficiently than that. So what I want to do next is just talk about how that kit was set up previously. Now, I could go through this bulleted list, but it's actually quite tedious. What's nicer is to see pretty pictures. Yeah. So my world before getting into cloud was dominated by Site Recovery Manager, SRM, which I'm sure some of you know. There are some books that we're going to be raffling off, and I think we have an SRM book, version 5. And if you know SRM at all, there might be a few people who do. There's often a process of having 2 virtual centers, yeah, and mapping your networks, VLAN 11, over to your networks over here, VLAN 51, mapping compute resources over here, clusters or resource pools, and so on. So it's a multi-site configuration. I had New York and New Jersey in the same rack in Derby. Now that's what I call consolidation. Yeah. 2 cities in 1 rack. Fantastic. Yeah. Now, where have I gone? Well, when I joined VMware in August, I took the opportunity to basically level the kit, because vSphere 5.1 came out just as I was joining the company. So I thought, well, I'm going to be doing something brand new, which is this vCloud Director stuff, and it's not just vCloud Director, it's the whole cloud suite stack. Why don't I do a kind of root and branch, you know, level the playing field and start again? So this is what I've done. I am using the Virtual Center Server appliance. Yeah. What I found interesting about Duncan's session this morning is I didn't know what the configuration maximums were, and I think I'm probably exceeding them, but it works perfectly fine because it is a lab environment, not production. But I've got more than 5 hosts. Was it 5 hosts and 50 VMs? Yeah, I didn't realise that. Perhaps I should have read the manual, shouldn't I? Oops. Yeah, that's about that. The main reason for doing this is I wanted to get rid of the Windows Virtual Center and, more importantly, the Windows SQL box. Because what I wanted to do was maximise the amount of resources I had and minimise my footprint in terms of VMs I needed just to make our junk work. I think it's good actually that the amount of CPU and memory that we assign to this appliance isn't that much different from having 2 Windows boxes and 1 being SQL anyway. But I guess what I've done is now I only have 2 instances to worry about rather than 1. The other thing I did was I used the vCloud Director appliance. Now, it's not supported in production environments. It's demo only, you know, demonstrations, evaluations. It's not production ready. It does not support multiple cell configurations and load balancing. But it is really easy to download, give it an IP address, and you're up and running. Yeah. I think it would be fair to say that anybody here who's installed vCloud Director, stick your hand up if you've done it. It's not the easiest of installs to do. And if your goal is, I've got a few hours while my girlfriend or wife is out doing something to do a bit of lab work, what you don't want to do is invest a lot of time in watching status bars go by. You want to actually get in and learn something or do something. So you want the on-ramp to be as low as possible to getting your thing up and running. Spending hours and hours installing things is actually quite a big waste of time, I think. Because where the interesting stuff happens is once the software is installed, not the installations yourself, as you all know. So that's what I've got at the moment. Obviously with, as you heard, the Virtual Center appliance, there's no linked mode with the Virtual Center appliance. So there's no role sharing or license sharing. So there is, you know, not exact feature parity. What made me switch over to the appliance was I believe in appliances anyway, but also speaking to our Virtual Center guy, whose Twitter handle happens to be @VirtualCenterGuy. I discovered that the APIs behind the virtual appliance are exactly the same APIs that I use with the Windows version. So for things like vCloud Director saying, spin up a resource pool, create a folder, that's the same on both. So I wouldn't run up against differences in that respect. Yeah. The other stuff I did, vShield Manager, VR, and so on, because I went appliance crazy, it's like, yeah, appliances, as many as possible. Yeah. Of course, vShield, now called VCNS, is a requirement of vCloud Director, so I couldn't really avoid that. When I was going through this process of putting together the vSphere layer, though, I often felt torn and challenged about how I was going to lay out my vSphere layer ready for vCloud Director. I had my SRM hat on at some point, and then I had my new cloud hat on, which was a new thing to me, still is new. And I guess the other thing I was torn by is I had the engineer part of my brain, yeah, the geek part of my brain, and then there was this cloud part of my brain that goes, simplify things, make this a consumptive model, make it easy for your consumers, the tenants, to easily use the resources. And the engineer's going, oh well, that didn't work, and what about this particular setting? And I think that's probably the way the next couple of years are going to pan out as we tussle between trying to make things simple and easy for our tenants to consume resources, and then the engineer part of your brain going, oh, I wonder what the parity level is on that. Yeah? And it's like, sometimes I wish I could find the off switch for my brain, but I haven't located it again. So what I mean by this is, here's what I would say I think a lot of customers do when it comes to vSphere. Let's assume you have more than one cluster. Yeah? To be honest with you, this particular part of my presentation doesn't work if you only have one cluster, because it's like no point discussing it. But let's say you create 2 clusters. Yeah. Very often you'll find that those clusters will have obviously a number of ESX hosts in them. Yeah. And there'll be a discrete number of networks or VLANs that are accessible just to that particular cluster. And there'd be a discrete set of volumes or LUNs assigned to those clusters. For those people who are working in a multiple cluster environment, is that something that you do? Stick your hand up if you do that kind of separation. I'm not saying what you're doing is wrong. I'm just trying to peel back the kimono, as the Americans like to say, of my kind of thinking. Yeah? Do some of you have a LUN which is visible to both clusters? Do that. Anybody do that at all? A few hands come. Can I ask, why is it that you do that?
Mainly for migration. It's just a temporary LUN. It doesn't stay there forever.
Yeah. You could have said, because I read it on Yellow Bricks, and Duncan said it was a good idea. The first time I heard of this actually was in the ESX2 book by Scott Harold and Ron Oglesby, who talked about the swing LUN, which I thought was a funny term. The swing. The swings. But it's about being able to move the workloads around. And what I think is interesting about that is we've created these barriers between these 2 environments. Why do we do that? Why do we create 2 separate clusters? What reasons might you have cluster A and cluster B? It's not a rhetorical question. Why do we have more than one cluster? Why do people do it?
Different storage technologies.
Oh yeah, or even better still, what if this is AMD? And what if this is Intel? That's precisely my situation. My Livonos are Intel boxes, the DL385s, the 5 indicates it's an AMD processor. I can't make one big cluster, even though I've only got a couple of servers. I'll take your hardware differences, I guess we could say, but an even better example of that is AMD to Intel, because we can't do vMotion from apples to oranges, not yet. Yeah? Any other reasons?
Security.
Security, this could be a PCI domain. Oops, my writing isn't very good. Licensing. Yeah, our friends Oracle. Yeah, don't we just love them and their licensing policy? Yeah. You know how VMware used to always get it in the neck over VRAM licensing? Yeah. When customers used to say that to me, I go, hang on a second, you've got Oracle? I go, yes. Look at their licensing policy, and then come back. Yeah. So, if you want to see really evil licensing, have a look at Oracle. In fact, my nickname for Oracle back then was, I'd say, Orrible rather than Oracle. So I'd talk about horrible licensing, dropping the H. Yeah, horrible. Anyway, I shouldn't really, is this me going negative on Oracle? I perhaps shouldn't do that. There we go. What if they are, somebody said security and I said PCI domains. I mean, a simple one is this is test and dev, and this is production. And we want to keep them separate. What I think is interesting about this just to take away as an idea, not yes, wrong, whatever. How interesting that we, as people who are in the vanguard of virtualization, the evangelists inside our companies who tell people how great virtualization is, have decided that the best way of managing their resources is to partition them physically. Isn't that ironic? Does anybody here not see how that feels a bit odd? You know, if we're meant to be entering this world of the software-defined data center, why are we still doing it by the hardware data center methods? Can we not get that separation using software tools rather than having to have it physically separated? And that is the tension I felt all the last 6 months. The engineer part of my brain, physically separate, guaranteed. But the new cloudy software-defined data center part of my brain goes, hey, that's the kind of old school method. Shouldn't we be using more flexible controls that we can reconfigure at our will, where we don't have to have a LUN that's visible to 2 clusters, have to power off the virtual machine to migrate it from one location to another, and then migrate it again off that storage before I can then have it run. It's great having the swing LUN, but there's a number of steps to go through. And unless you script it, it's all automated, isn't it? So I'm not saying what I've done in my lab is the right way. Let me get that important to you. I am not a guru or an expert. I'm still learning. And all I'm doing is sharing my learning with you. So if you disagree with what I've done in my lab environment, fine. What I'm just trying to do is be part of that process by we discuss, should we do it this way or should we do it that way? And I also think it's kind of funny in my own lab environment, I've done it both. So where I want hardware separation, I've done it. But where I want software separation, I've done it in software. So that's the way forward. Have your cake and eat it, do both. Yeah? Both hardware and software silos, and then no one can criticise you that you've done it wrong because you've used all the methods. Yeah? So this is what I've got in my lab environment at the moment. I created 2 clusters called Gold and, oops, let's go back a second. Gold and Silver. And what forced that was the CPU differences. I thought that's quite interesting. I've just said, you know, why do we define things by hardware? But at my first task, which was to create a cluster, I had to remember that one was AMD and one was Intel. Yeah? So I can have these grand visions of a capacity-based model where resources are delivered on a flexible, on-demand, elastic, enterprise, yada, 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 buzzword, buzzword. But when it came down to it, I had to go, oh, AMD, Intel, they don't live together. Yeah? The hardware world came in and said, yeah, I think again, Mike. Yeah? One big cluster with everything in, you know that doesn't work. Yeah? Also notice that I've got infrastructure resource pools. This is something you will see in your home lab. The ideal world of design in vCloud Director is to have a dedicated management cluster, separate and discrete from the clusters where your tenants live. But in your home lab, do you have enough resources to dedicate computers just to running Virtual Center and all those sorts of things? Or does your management layer sit on top of the very thing that you're managing? Yeah? Is that the case? Yeah. The reason that we avoid that in the production is because nobody wants to be the person sat on a tree with a saw in their hand, yeah, making changes to their environment that could affect the very management of the system that they're trying to, cutting their own branch off. That's something you're going to have to live with to some degree if you're in a home lab because you might not have the resources to have that separation. Yeah? You may have to take compromises. And that's what design actually is, isn't it? Design is all about compromise. It isn't about some fixed ideal of how it should be. It's about what we can achieve with what we've got and how we justify them. So all design is about compromise, but trying to keep the compromises as small as possible and as least painful as possible. So I ended up with one site, 2 clusters, the infrastructure resource pool, because I didn't have a management cluster. My goal was to just max out as much memory as I had available, because let's face it, in a home lab, or in my lab, it's always memory when you run out first, not the other resources. It's always memory, memory, memory every single time. The separation of the clusters was forced by my CPU differences. There was nothing much I could do about that. Interestingly, the gold cluster does have QLogic cards, but the silver cluster doesn't. because I haven't paid for them. I guess I could buy some, but if I did, I'd need ports on my fibre channel switch, and I don't want to buy another FC switch. So the only difference really beyond the memory in the CPU is that they've got access to different storage. Both clusters have access to iSCSI and NFS, but only one cluster has access to fibre channel at 2 gig. Yeah? I must admit though, in my home lab, do I ever saturate my 2 gig fibre connections? No. So really I'm creating a very artificial distinction, really, in a lab environment, but I'm trying to make it as realistic as possible, as you always do in a lab environment, so it's not that different from your production environment. Storage, I have a couple of volumes for my infrastructure, templates and software and things like that. Local storage all got dumped in one folder. And then I ended up with, not started out with, 4 tiers of storage. Your platinum, your gold, your bronze, your silver. Yeah? You'll laugh at this. Initially I started off with 14 tiers of storage. Yeah? That was my engineer brain taking over. I've got 10 minutes. All right, I need to go a lot quicker.